Dagda Bogus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and today I have a couple of interesting explorations really around a query that popped up in our Irish Pagan School community social media space. It was a question around relationships, specifically around the Dagda's relationship with the Morrigan and his other relationships or love affairs, specifically in this instance with Boan. So the query really as it came up was the person was having a bit of difficulty kind of approaching or connecting in right relationship with a Dagda, given that from their perspective, he cheated on the Morrigan. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, in regards to the relationship dynamic and structure here, at the point of the Second Battle of Moytura, on the run up to the Second Battle of Moytura, we have this impending invasion of the Fomorians. The Dagda kind of leaves the gathering of the men of the goddess to go and meet with the Morrigan to receive kind of prophecy and her to engage with her skill and talent telling the future so that she would be able to tell him where the Fomorian warhouse was going to land. Now, in this section of the text, it does say that they meet at the ford of the River Unshin and they couple in the ford, and from then on, it is known as the bed of the couple. And it is said kind of like the understanding and the information that goes there is that it's the bed of the couple and they are a wedded partnership. They are a union together, like they're in essence man and wife. Now later on in the stories, we of course have the conception and birth of Angus MacOg. Angus MacIndog being the young son of the Dagda, him being conceived and born all in one day because of the Dagda's ability and authority to stop the sun from moving through the sky, so that 9 months would pass in a day, and that Elkmer, the husband of Boan, who was Dagda's lover and mother of Angus, could conceive and birth and be restored before Elkmer came home. So it's understandable looking at it from a certain point of view that, like, okay, well, he's married, Dagda is married to the Morrigan, but then he has this lover relationship with Boan and, brings forth a child, but also that child is brought forth in such a way that the sun will be like, the laws of reality will be put on hold so that, Boan could be restored having already had the child before her husband came back. So looking into this, from our current perspectives, it does seem like there's something a little bit illicit going on. There's some kind of, extramarital affair circumstance here, and then that's where a lot of people kind of come to this idea of this cheating. So the challenge though is that we need to kind of divorce ourselves from our current views and our current kind of perceptions of things, because it's difficult or dangerous to enforce our perceived morality onto a circumstance that is, A, not of our culture, or B, of our culture so long in the past that, the fundamentals, the basics of cultural morality is 100% different. So I'm positioning this more as a topical exploration. I'm not going to say good or bad, yes or no, as the Dagda person in the Irish Pagan School and in my own belief and stuff. He is flawed. He's not like this perfect individual. He's not this perfect iconic, infallible deity that other deities are portrayed as. And I think that's where we do get into this bit of a, a conflict, really, as we're trying to observe these pagan deities. So the first thing really to kind of roll it back, when we have to be aware of Catholic bias and Christian bias, because the Christian kind of upbringing raises us to, like, again, me, I was raised Irish Catholic for most of my life before I began to explore my queries around spirituality as opposed to religious dogma, which was what I had when I was growing up. So what we're presented with in that exploration of spirituality, again, there's nothing wrong with Christianity. It's a beautiful kind of expression of religious spirituality. Where I have a problem is with the religious organizations and the religious dogma that's built up around that. So the understanding of that faith is that God created everything and God is infallible. God does not make mistakes. He's omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, knows everything, capable of everything, is everywhere, and knows everything, and doesn't make mistakes. That is not any other God by any other circumstance. So, and I think that's where we begin to get this bit of a differential, because the Dagda is seen as this um, kind of leader god, this kind of kingly god, this father god amongst the Irish pantheon. And if you try and equate him to this omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, infallible individual, you are going to find shortcomings. But the purpose of getting to know these gods and getting to know these stories of these gods is not to just hold up an ideal, but is to learn from that relationship and to grow from it, and to accept that, in many ways, when we look at the Irish gods, we're not just looking at ephemeral entity out in the void, astral, whatever it actually is. We're looking more so at ancestral deities, in that, no, they were a tribe of people in Ireland. They went out of Ireland. They came back into Ireland as the descendants, the Tuatha Danann being descended from the tribe of Nemeth, who was originally in Ireland. So there's this emigration, immigration, but then they themselves are kind of dispossessed of the rule of Ireland, but they don't leave Ireland. And there are many families that kind of claim like lineage back to these deities in these instances. And so that is something that we need to kind of start with. Like, we're dealing with ancestral gods. So with that point made, like, we're not dealing with, we have to kind of begin to shift our perspective into our relationships with these individuals and with these deities. So now we talk about the Dagda himself, of course. Is the Dagda omniscient? Does he know everything? No, he doesn't. There's a lot that he does know. It says that, like, he had the extent of all druidic knowledge and a lot of occult or hidden knowledge when he came into Ireland. But there are, like, going back to the start of our video here, he didn't know where the Fomorians were going to land, so he went to the Morrigan to get that information. So he's not omniscient. He's not all-knowing. Is he omnipresent? Is he, like, everywhere all of the time at every time? No, he's not. Like, there's many occasions where, for example, Lugh comes to Tara and he kind of earns himself the seat of the sage, which is, he gets himself into Tara by proving that he's the one person there who's capable of all of these different skills. Um, but we know that the Dagda is capable of absolutely everything as well. So where was the Dagda when Lugh kind of came rocking up to the door? So we know he's not omnipresent. When it comes down to omnipotent, that's where things begin to, like, stack up for the Dagda, because when we look at the story of how he gains the club, he lists out his own personal powers when he swears a binding oath upon those powers to return the club and to use it ethically and appropriately. And he lists out his authority over sun, moon, land, sea, sky. He lists out pretty much all of creation. The only power he doesn't have at that point is life and death, but that's what he's picking up when he takes up the club. So it might be fair to say that the Dagda is omnipotent, but this mean that the Dagda is infallible? And the answer is no. He's definitely not infallible. Even in that story of where he gets the club, when he finds his son Kermit is slain, he carries the body out of Ireland to try and find some way to restore his child to life. He comes across, this power in this club held by one of three brothers, and through guile, he gets them to hand them the club, and then straight up kills them with it, and then takes the power to restore his son. Now, that's fallible. We know he's flawed. We know he's done the wrong thing, because the first thing Kermit, his son, does on waking up from being dead is call his dad out on what is unjust and inappropriate behavior. So the Dagda then restores the life, and that's where he swears himself to the binding oath on his own power to use it properly and to return it eventually. So we do see that there is flaws, and this is this idea, this aspect of ancestor deities. Like, they are coming from a much more human view and perspective on things, and that's where it can be easier for us to acknowledge those things, because we are those things. We are as flawed in many ways as they are. So we then need to move it towards this relationship status. So we've clarified that the Dagda is very powerful, but we've also clarified that, he's also flawed, so he is not human. They're not like human per se as we are. But there is a humanity involved here that we need to be aware of and conscientious of. So when we look at morality, the name the Dagda actually means the goodly god. Like it's the name that's given upon him at the meeting of the goddess on the run up to the second battle of Moytur. Actually, no, it's the follow-up meeting. Is it? Sorry, there's two meetings before the Fomorian invasion, one hosted by Nuada and one hosted by Lu. But it's the first one where Nuada is kind of calling on these various different skilled individuals, the sorcerers, the cupbearers, like the druids, all to do these skills. Dagda says, "Listen, everything you've promised, all these labors, I'll take them on and do them myself." And that's when Nuada says, "You are the Dagda, you are the goodly god." And so the goodly god, though, means this acknowledgement to him as an ability, as a person who is good at everything. It's not morally good. He's not, this moral paragon of, what is right and what is wrong, or what is good and what is bad. And what we're dealing with is him being referred to as someone who is good at everything, good at all of the abilities and the skills, which we see time and again in the stories. So we loop it back to this morality. And this is where the tripping really happens, because it's a bit flawed for us to try and presume our morals and our ethics onto a culture that is radically different, generations, thousands of years different from where we are now. And so for many countries around the world, there is a commonality. There is marriages or relationships are perceived to be monogamous. The standard, or the base standard, if there is even a standard, is that relationships are monogamous. They exist between like two individuals. But that's not the only format of relationship. There are polyamorous relationships where relationships exist between multiple individuals, but that's also relationships, not marriages. And there are, a lot of difficulty around how we perceive our legal structures based on how we have evolved as a culture to where we are now. And this is where we need to make really the last point, or hopefully the next point in our clarification of this, which is the legal point. Under the Brehon laws, which are the ancient laws of Ireland, there wasn't just one kind of marriage. There were at least 8 distinct kinds of marriage, because the old Irish structure was very classist. There was, like, multiple different tiers of society within the Tua, which meant that every individual had an honor price or a blood price. So if some harm was done against them, depending on their status within society, there was some recompense or value that had to be paid. Which meant that any union or relationships between people of the same status would have some rules around it. Between people of different status would have different rules around it. Between people of vastly different status would have vastly different rules around it. So it's understandable that there would be a lot of different legal ramifications when you're dealing with that structure and that society. So with these 8 different types of marriages that we have from the law tracks, from the Brehon laws, if we kind of begin to move our perspective through that lens and apply that to the culture that we're looking at, then the relationship or the type of marriage that exists between the Dagda and the Morrigan, I would suggest, would be the marriage of equals. So this is a very particular format of marriage. It usually existed only between the individuals in a very high class, a very top tier class within society. And it meant that those two people came into the union as equals. Everything they had outside of that union before the union was still theirs. If at any point they leave the union, they take everything that was theirs with them, and 50% of whatever was gained within the marriage itself. When it comes to decisions or to or any kind of um, legal structures, power structures, anything like that at all, there are two opinions that have to be heard, and it is in the meeting of those two opinions that any decision is made regarding that couple. Another very famous example of this that we see is later on in the Ulster cycle with, of course, the very famous union between Maeve and Allil during the Táin. And so Maeve and Allil ostensibly have a marriage of equals. And this kind of at the start of the Táin, when there's the pillow talk and they're comparing assets. Oh, well, I have X number of warriors and I have X number of warriors. I have X chariots, I have X chariots. And they go through and it turns into a full-on accounting. They raise the entire household in Rathcroghan and demand that everything be counted. from down to the chalices to the servants to the hounds to everything has to be counted. Because if at any point the value is not equal, then the underlying structure of that relationship, of that marriage, of that union of equals is no longer equal. And so this is where we get to this bother with the Fionn Vanach, the white bull, who has left Maeve's herd and wandered over into Allil's herd and refused to come back. So Allil then claims that that's his bull, and that's what means that there's no bull in Maeve's herd, the like of the Fionn Vanach, which undermines their entire kind of relationship structure. So there is one other thing to consider when we look at specifically Maeve in this. Maeve and Allil was Maeve's second husband. She was originally married to a guy called Uchud, and the rules really getting married to Queen Maeve of Connacht involved very clear stipulations that any person who is going to be your husband has to be at least as generous as she is, at least as courageous as she is, and never jealous of her. Those are three baselines. Those are like the fundamental, here is the clear understanding that this has to be baseline in a relationship. Otherwise, the relationship ends and is over. And so Uchud is equally generous as Maeve initially, and equally kind of courageous as Maeve, and equally kind of not jealous of her until Allil comes into the Connacht court and Maeve, has an eye for him. And so Maeve has appetites, and Maeve is shown to very clearly engage in those appetites, and there's no issue with that as long as the partner, as long as Uchud in this case, is not jealous. He becomes jealous, that then undermines the relationship, that then breaks the union of equals, and that means that, in essence, Maeve is free to divorce Uchud, or in this case, Allil kills Uchud, and then Maeve marries Allil. And the same applies with Allil. He and Maeve fairly balanced all the way through, right up until Fergus comes in the exiles from Ulster, and it was said of Maeve that of an evening she would have 7 men or Fergus. And this sexual relationships or sexual engagements doesn't have to exist within a marriage. It can exist within a marriage, but it's not fundamentally restricted to within the marriage, as we can see in the lore and in the stories. So Maeve has multiple partners. Maeve is perfectly fine with that, and Allil is initially perfectly fine with that. He could have multiple partners as well. That is just the nature of their union of equals. They are free to be wedded together as a couple, but also engage in their other relationships. Um, and it's only when, again, Uchud becomes jealous of Allil that there's a problem, and then Allil becomes jealous of Fergus that there's a problem. So if we kind of take the Ulster cycle, which follows directly after the mythological cycle as indicative of the evolving culture, then the Brehon laws applying there, these marriages of equals, we take that back into the mythological cycle. It's entirely possible that the Morrigan and the Dagda have this union relationship of equals, which means they're completely open and completely free to have other relationships outside of it. We know that the Dagda has many children. He like Bridget is a daughter, Kermit, AIDS, there are so many children, and then foster children of the Dagda. We know that the Morrigan does have one child, Mich. Oh, sorry, no, Mich is the son of Dean Kecht. It's Mecha, is the son of the Morrigan, but he is born tormented with 3 serpents inside of his heart, which are going to destroy the world. It doesn't say who his father is, though. It could be the Dagda, but it could be someone else. It doesn't say who Bridget's mother is. It could be the Morrigan. It could be someone else. It doesn't say who Kermit's mother is. Could be the Morrigan. Could be someone else. The only one that we know for sure is Angus McGindog. It's Boan is his mother, and Dagda is his father. So this idea of sorry, there is one last thing. There's one last thing that I include in this, really, and this is where we step a little bit to the left into John's personal view and John's personal gnosis. When we factor in who the Morrigan is, what kind of goddess she is. She's a goddess of poetry, battle, and prophecy. The Morrigan sees what's coming down the line. The Morrigan knows what's coming down the line, and her abilities are so reliable that the Dagda, having had conference with the other gods in the meeting of the goddess on the run of the second Battle of Moytura goes to her because he knows 100% she will know what the Fomorians are going to land. She will be able to tell him how shit's going to play out. So if we understand that, and if we accept that that is fundamentally baseline, characteristically an element or facet of the Morrigan's power, then we should be cautious not to disempower her when it comes to things like the birth of Angus. For me, in my opinion, I, I wouldn't think for a second that the Morrigan would not know that Angus was going to be born, that Angus would need to be born. Because the position that Angus holds within the Tuatha Dé Danann and then further on, down in even into the Fenian cycle, is very, very important. And so for the birth of such a powerful, well, actually, Angus, the name Angus is unique force of vigor, is what it translates to. And so for the manifestation or creation of the birth of this unique force of vigor into reality, to think for a second that the Morrigan would not know that that was coming down the line or that was needed to come down the line, I think is doing the Morrigan a bit of an injustice. So wrapping it all off together, when we kind of pull this information in, you know, we need to be cautious again, looking at this ancient history or even other cultures. And again, our culture now, Irish culture now, is very disparate, very entirely fucking different, thanks colonization, all the rest of it, to the ancient culture of Ireland. You know, our legal status, like in many ways, it'd be fascinating if we still existed under the Brehon laws as opposed to the maritime laws, which were enforced upon us because of colonization. Um, but we need to kind of be cautious when we're looking at these tales, not to put a bias of our own modern morality into those stories, onto those circumstances. You know, the Dagda is a god. He's a goodly god. He's capable of so much. He's so hugely powerful, but he's also flawed. But that doesn't make him any less a god. That doesn't make him any less a deity. That doesn't make him any less someone that you can look up to and learn from. In fact, it's almost easier to connect and learn from him because we can learn from his mistakes. We can see where he did it wrong. We can see where he loses control of himself and takes life in order to restore life, and that is not balanced. That is not right. He then makes up for that by swearing oaths and binding himself not just to return the club, but to the proper ethical use of that club. So he takes the teaching. He sits the fuck down when Kermit calls him out on it. He takes the teaching on board and makes a change. Other times through the stories, you know, we see him acting in a very warrior aspect. You know, when he charges the battle lines of the first Battle of Moytura and opens a gap for 120 warriors to come after him. But in the same circumstance, when Nuada is cut down in that same battle, it's the Dagda who breaks through to Nuada and stands over him, bodily defending him until Nuada, having lost his arm in the Battle of Shreng, is removed from the battlefield. So we need to be looking at these stories for what they can teach us, for what we can learn from them, but then also being cautious not to apply a bias. And again, like hands up, 100%. I am biased. I'm a Dagda guy. I really, really am. This god has meant so much to me in my life, and I have grown through so much of learning those stories and engaging in my relationship with him. That's over here on the shelf behind me is a cauldron, and beside it is a mug where the Dagda has his morning coffee, where I give him coffee as offerings with cream, which is the dairy offering for him. But hopefully that answers that question. You know, or even if it doesn't answer that question, it provides some kind of perspective or some kind of information that allows for people to consider things a little bit differently. Because that's really what we're on about here. It's about looking at the stories, looking at the information, and then altering our perceptions and perspectives on things until we can find, I won't say truth, you know, I will say, well, truth. I'm trying not to say truth. So it's difficult because I don't want to be turned around and says, well, you know, you will learn the truth of, like, you'll learn the truth. You will learn what you need to learn. And I think that's really what it comes down to. It's by looking at these stories, going through these teachings and experiencing the relationship with these deities that you will learn what it is that you need to learn for your own personal spiritual growth to go forward in our world. So again, fascinating question. If you know me at all, you know that I absolutely really love good questions that you can kind of get into and kind of bend your brain around. So that is one that I have been pondering over for a while, and I'm hopefully this is information that you will enjoy the share of. So again, thank you very, very much for being with us. Gaurav Mahagas from myself and from Laura and all of us at the Irish Pagan School. Look after yourself, take care, and until the next time, slán. Goodbye.